So who were the people right after the flood, before the Tower of Babel, and also after? Now, when we look at history, we need to look at the evidence of these first humans and the gods or God they worshipped. A lot of people think that the ancient Sumerians were just strange people that's not connected to the Bible at all. From Adam to Noah, there was 10 generations. By the 7th generation, something started to happen. Where do all our religions come from originally? Let's take a look at the Blackheads first. Who are they? Where do they come from? There's even some writings that talk about how these Nephilim drank the blood of humans as well, and some people had rituals. But take a look at how Genesis describes this period. Hey guys, today we're starting with a new series that might scare your socks off or surprise you beyond belief, because we're going to dig deep. We're going to look into the origin of all religions, when and how it all started and changed over the centuries. This series is so important because we human beings, we live according to what we believe, right? The problem is our beliefs differ. One person's right is another person's wrong. In other words, not everyone can be right. So we have to ask ourselves, how and why are we really here on Earth? What created the universe with time, space, and matter? And of course, those three things had to come into existence at the exact same time. We also have to ask ourselves, where do we go when we die? And we have to ask, is there different worlds out there? Different dimensions? Spiritual beings? Or aliens? Now, to answer these very important questions, there are other questions we need to answer first. Where do all our religions come from originally? In other words, who were the first humans and what gods or God did they worship? Before Islam, before the Romans, Greeks, Aztecs, and before ancient Egypt. Now, when we look at history, we need to look at the evidence of these first humans and the gods or God they worshipped. One of the best and the most historically descriptive books out there, or sources, is the book of Genesis, with so much detail, written by Moses in Hebrew around 3,400 years ago, and who had a high-quality Egyptian education as he basically grew up with the Pharaoh. But it is not the oldest written down information we have. So in this series, I want to focus on all the other historical writings before Moses, to see if these recordings agree with what Moses wrote. Now we know all human cultures and languages can be traced back to the land of ancient Mesopotamia that began before and after the Great Flood. The people first settled down on and around Mount Ararat, according to the pottery evidence we have there. And then, over time, some families gradually moved down from the mountains of Ararat after the flood to dwell in the land of Sumer. Most of them were known as the Semites and Sumerians. Now, we have to look at what these cultures wrote down, because they were there, right? We weren't. So, do we have any ancient writings? Yes. Many of these tablets were lost into history, but many have been found, especially the 30,000 tablets that were collected in a library at Nineveh, including the Epic of Gilgamesh. The Assyrian king Ashurbanipal boasted about collecting it all. From these ancient records, we know that these people, the ancient Sumerians, called themselves the black-headed people. This is interesting because it means they wanted to differentiate themselves from other people who also lived in this time, who probably started to spread throughout the world. What is shocking is that these blackheads recorded in their legends that all weapons, tools, and amazing inventions were given to them by the gods, plural. Wow, these people received some special knowledge from these beings. Some people today say that they are aliens. More about that later. First, we need to talk about who these people were and the gods they worshipped. Let's take a look at the Blackheads first. Who are they? Where do they come from? According to their writings, they were created at a place called Nippur, the place where heaven and earth connects, comes together, which means the realm of humans and gods. Now, we already know that they lived before the flood, the great deluge, in the antediluvian world, but also after that. We know that they moved down from the Mount of Ararat because of the pottery we found, and they moved into the plains, ancient Sumeria. Remember, at this time, all the people spoke the same language, before and right after the flood, up until the Tower of Babel, also known as a temple, also known as a ziggurat. When new languages came and spread into all the world. Now, according to their records, they were created as male and female. Very unlike what people say today, right? That there are more genders. But more about this later. They were created to be male and female with a command to multiply on the earth and to work the ground. Sounds very similar to the book of Genesis. It was written in Hebrew, a language that came much later. It is the same story, but the Hebrew book of Genesis covers it in more specific detail. And there's a lot more manuscripts of it. Now, just to make this clear, one thing to keep in mind, just because something is written first, it doesn't make that true. For example, let me give an example here, because people are people and people lie, right? Because they have agendas. A good example is what happened with Trump. The first news company said Trump fell to the ground at speech, while actually, he ducked because he was shot at. Then later, with time, some sources accurately said it was an attempted assassination, and they had more detail. Now, humans don't change, right? They lie, some people believe lies, some people write down lies, and they don't even know that they believe lies, right? But it is clear that almost all ancient sources, the evidence points to the fact that there was a global flood, that people lived before the flood. When we look at the book of Genesis, when we look at the Apocrypha books like the book of Enoch, when we look at what the Sumerians wrote down on their tablets, and they explain what the world before the flood was like. The Apocrypha, for example, explains that fallen angels rebelled against the Most High God. Then they fell to earth, led by a fallen angel called Azazel, who specifically came to Cain's descendants to give them secret arts and to sleep with the woman to create the Nephilim. They were mixed breeds of angel and human DNA, most of them powerful giants. Now, people wanted to, and some were forced to worship them. These fallen angels and Nephilim lived among these people as gods ruling over them. Now, regarding the pre-flood world, the antediluvian world, it is interesting what Gary Wayne wrote in his books called The Genesis 6 Conspiracy. He said Cain and the fallen angels transformed the Sumerian sect from a nomadic hunter and gatherer society into an agrarian-based society. Cain, Enoch, and the fallen angels then transformed the Sumerians into a society of builders and masons, worshipping the 7 sacred sciences, along with their false gods, just as the craft legends recorded. Now, please don't confuse this Enoch with the good Enoch from the family line of Noah and Seth. This is the evil Enoch from the line of Cain. They have the same names. Now, many ancient writings explain how evil the world became before the flood, including the Bible, Genesis. It became so evil with these fallen angels, the Nephilim, aka demigods, and evil cities of people who just did evil continually. Murder, rituals, rape. It was a society of evil people who immersed themselves in mysticism and even other unthinkable sin, like sacrificing people that became so bad that God had to purge the world with a global flood. There's even some writings that talk about how these Nephilim drank the blood of humans as well, and some people at rituals. But take a look at how Genesis describes this period of complete evil. Genesis 6 verse 5. The Lord saw that the wickedness of man was great in the earth, and that every, not some, every intention of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continually. You see, there was no other choice but for God to stop it. Just think about the unthinkable hurt, pain, and suffering everybody went through. Kids grew up in this sick world. So God came and He purged it. Specifically also because of the fallen angels and Nephilim and because of what they did. Now the black-headed people, the ancient Sumerians, they also said there was a great flood. The most famous record of this is the Epic of Gilgamesh. Then there are others, like the Athrosis epic and the Sumerian king list. Then as time went on after the Sumerians, other cultures came, and we also read from their writings, their records, that there was a flood. And after the flood, there was a man that survived. Most of them also talk about his family. And then they repopulated the whole earth. Their names changed because languages changed. The Bible mentions Noah and his 3 sons. The ancient Sumerians called him Zuesudra in one of their writings. In another, Upnapishtam. In Greek mythology, they call him Deucalion. In Hindu mythology, we have Manu. In Chinese mythology, we have Fuhai. And even in Hawaiian mythology, we have Nu'u. And the list goes on and on. Most cultures in the world have stories about the flood. Why? Because there was a flood. I already covered this in my video called The Things Most People Don't Know About the Flood. Please check it out after this video. Now there's also something very interesting about Atlantis that's connected with the time period before the flood, but I will come back to this later in this series. And people forget this time period from the beginning of the world, creation to the flood, was actually a very long period of time. Some cultures called it the first time or the golden age. Adam is called King Ataba in the Sumerian king list or Adama in Sumerian lore. So this was the time period that the Sumerians described as before the flood, where this king Ataba was seen as the Sangal Rugal, which just means priest and king. So it wasn't just a king, but a priest. A priest to who? The God Most High, they called him. The ancient Sumerians called their god An or Anu, A-N or A-N-U. And it was written down in a star form on cuneiform. Very, very interesting why, and I'll come back to that later. Now he had 2 sons. An had Enlil and also Enki. Anu translated from ancient Sumeria means heaven and was used to refer to the God Most High, the parent god. Then Enki, translated from Sumerian, literally means Lord of the earth. And then Enlil was also known as the king of the gods, just like his father An, the God Most High. The Sumerians also say that he, Enlil, was the one who sent the flood. Now, there's a lot to unpack here, and we will get to it as we continue with this series. And then when you find out who they really are and who we know them as today, it is going to shock you. But I want to get back very quickly to something important. From Adam to Noah, there was 10 generations. But the 7th generation, something started to happen. The world became very evil. And it's this time where the fallen angels bred but slept, maybe it's a bad word, but anyway, slept with human women to create the Nephilim, mixed breeds of fallen angel and human DNA. The Sumerians called the fallen angels and the Nephilim gods, all of them. The Apocrypha books call them Watchers and the Shining Ones, aka Nephilim. Other cultures later also called them gods, titans, and demigods. Hey guys, I hope you're enjoying this video so far, but I have some big and exciting news to share. I'm writing a novel with my brother set in the world before the flood. And I have to say, it's going to feel like a mix of fantasy and historical fiction, much like Lord of the Rings, Warcraft, or Narnia. But here's the best part. It's based on biblical and archaeological truths. In this book, we're diving deep into the ancient world of fallen angels, the Nephilim, and the family lines of Adam, specifically Seth and Cain. We'll get to experience how they lived in cities like Nippur and Eridu, how they fell into darkness, and how they became so evil in a world filled with beasts and dragons, like the Behemoth and Leviathan, described in the book of Job. If you've ever wondered what the world was like before the flood, then this novel is going to bring it to life in a way you've never seen before. It's packed with action, spiritual battles, and deep insights into humanity's early struggles. And here's the exciting part. I'm giving you, my amazing subscribers, all of you who follow me here on DLM, free access to the first few chapters of the book for free. All you gotta do is click the link in the video description below, enter your name and email, and we'll send it to you as soon as it is ready. Now, if you're watching this video much later, this book might already be out. So you can just get it at our website, www.dlm-christianlifestyle.com. Now, this book is also perfect for non-believers or even those on the fence with their faith, because it's a gripping story that pulls you in, and before you know it, if you're around about in the middle to the end of the book, you'll realize how it aligns with God's Word, the Bible. Thanks for sticking with me. Now, let's get back to the message of today. Now, let me read Genesis 6 verse 4 for you. The Nephilim were on the earth in those days, and also afterward, meaning after the flood, when the sons of God came into the daughters of man, and they bore children to them. These were the mighty men who were of old, the men of renown. In this time, people moved away from worshiping the God Most High and started to worship these other gods, fallen angels as gods, and also their offspring, mixed breeds, Nephilim, as gods, especially when they got the new knowledge and went into mysticism and rituals. It became so evil that God had to stop it with a great flood. But according to Genesis, Noah was a righteous man. God saved him and his family. So after the flood, they repopulated the earth. Other cultures call him different names because they have different languages, right? And we get an idea of how big this population could have been up until the Tower of Babel and also after that. It was roughly over 60 families before the Tower of Babel, which is over 8,000 people in just 3 generations, if you use the timeline of the Masoretic text. The Septuagint text timeline will work out even more. Then at the Tower of Babel, of course, God confused their languages and they spread throughout the world, but there were still people living there in ancient Mesopotamia after the Tower of Babel. A. John M. Osgood wrote, "The population 350 years after the flood could be massive. Theoretically, if we do not count conflict, disease, and infant mortality, a figure of 3.5 million could be present if we use the number of males in the first and second generations mentioned in Genesis 10. And assume an average male reproduction rate of 3 generations and a generation time of 30 years, according to Genesis 11. The population would be 88 million if at this time it was a 4-family generation, and 634 million if a 5-family generation. I have approximated the count of first and second generation post-flood male groups in Genesis 10 to be 65. Of course, this is only counting males. We doubled that for the total population. So who were the people right after the flood, before the Tower of Babel, and also after it? Well, we need to look at Noah's sons. Noah had 3 sons, Ham, Shem, and Japheth. Of course, there were also the Nephilim. Remember Genesis 6 says there were the Nephilim in those days and also after it. But it will take me a whole video just to explain how it is possible that they can be there afterwards as well, after the flood. But we need to start here with Noah's sons. So let's start with Shem first. Shem brought forth Elam, Asher, Arphaxad, Lut, and Aram. So he is important because for those of you who do not know, he is the father of a lot of nations, but one of those nations is Israel. Of course, the father of Israel is Abraham, and Abraham comes from Shem. Now, this is extremely important because Abraham is the 9th generation from Shem. And Shem was still alive when Abraham was there. A lot of people don't know this. This is important to understand. Remember, Shem and his 2 brothers still came from the pre-flood world with good DNA. But after them, the lifespan of people started to be shorter after the flood. Shem lived to be 600 years old, while Abraham died at 175. What is even more shocking is that Shem was still alive when Abraham died. What this means is that Abraham, not just him, but also all his fathers going up the generations, could have easily learned from Shem and even Noah himself what the pre-flood world was like, that relationship. They could have seen how Noah still worshipped God, the God Most High. And they could have written it down, and we just never discovered it, and maybe it's just lost. And then, of course, after Abraham, Moses wrote it down. The first 5 books, in fact, of Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. 5 books. In case you didn't know, the nation of Israel comes from Abraham, his son Isaac, and then Jacob. And the Muslims today also through Abraham's son Ishmael. Now, the Semites come from Shem. Shem, Semites, right? In ancient Sumer. That's where they come from. A lot of people think that the ancient Sumerians were just strange people that's not connected to the Bible at all. Well, most of them come from the line of Ham. I'll explain this as we continue. Moses called Sumer Shinar because of his Egyptian education in the book of Genesis. Genesis 11 verse 1. Now the whole earth had one language and the same words, and as people migrated from the east, they found a plain in the land of Shinar, Sumer, and settled there. Now, what a lot of people don't know is the first people, the first families who came to the plains to live in ancient Sumeria was the people from Shem, the Semites. Check this out. In answersresearchjournal.org, this map shows the Ubaite, who is named after Arphaxad, the son of Shem, son of Noah, close to the Iranian Susiana, who is Elam, Samara on the mid-Tigris, Hasuna, who is Asher, further north. Then Halaf, which is Aram. Now, I want this video to be very interesting and I don't want it to be too long, so I don't have all the time to go into detail of how, the different routes they took from the mountains of Ararat to go into the plains. And we know that from the pottery that we found in different areas. But let me just try to quickly summarize it. The Ubaite cultural period is named after a site in southern Iraq today that used to be ancient Persia, called Ubaite, where a specific type of early pottery was found. The exact same pottery was then found at Eridu, and the lowest levels of Uruk, and was judged to be one of the earliest cultures in southern Mesopotamia as we know it. So let me make this simple. The Ubaite culture comes from Ur of the Chaldees. And those who read their Bibles know that this is where Abram comes from, who later became Abraham. The Ubaite people, together with Samara on the mid-Tigris, Hazuna further north, then Halaf was the earliest archaeologically defined cultures of the Mesopotamian plain. In other words, all these cultures were probably Semitic, coming from the line of Shem, known initially as Shemer, Shumer, Sumer, which basically means the land of Shem. This is very important to understand because the Uruk culture came much later. From Ham, the Hamites, who then erected the Tower of Babel, which was Nimrod, Ham's grandson. This is important to understand because most of the ancient Sumerian writings, like the Epic of Gilgamesh, come from these people. According to Osgood, all of these cultures can be retrospectively traced back to the areas around the western area close to Lake Urmia by pottery culture and stone cultures. So Lake Urmia is just east of Mount Ararat, and then first came Shem, his family, and then later followed Ham. David Roll, Poobel, and Kramer has indicated that the name Sumer, biblical Shinar, is derived from the name of the father of its first inhabitants, Shem, the second son of Noah. Shem, in brackets Semitic, is from Shemer, Shumer, in brackets Sumerian. The unpronounced R is dropped in the Semitic. Shemer, Shumer, is known to us as Sumer. The Egyptian name was Sennar and was placed in the Bible as Shinar by the Egyptian-trained Moses, a rebuke to the fallacious claims against Mosaic authorship of Genesis. The Egyptians placed Sennar, in brackets Sumer, in ancient Mesopotamia. Now, I want you to put yourself in the shoes of Noah and his sons. What do? You just arrive on Mount Ararat, the waters are still going down. What do? Go far, travel wide? No, first you start to put up shelters close by. You start to live on and around Mount Ararat. You wait for the waters to recede. You set up survival camps and you have kids to help you survive in this new world. Then later, once you have set up basic survival strategies, you and your children, as they grow into adults, might start to venture out into different directions. But family groups will stick together to survive. Osgood said, "It is likely that as the ice period began to develop after the flood, the mountains would have become less hospitable for some, and so they would have moved down into the plain. Such was the early action of the sons of Shem. But it appears that not too long after this, Cush and his sons followed, settling first in lower Mesopotamia near the Euphrates." Who is this Cush? Well, this is important because Cush is the son of Ham. He is an important figure because Nimrod comes from Cush, who erected the Tower of Babel and who actually became the first world leader. He's very important. And then what about Adam's other son, Japheth? How did they set up nations, religions, and have war with each other in ancient Mesopotamia with their god or gods? That is what we're going to talk about in part 2 of this series. So please remember, if you're new here, subscribe so you won't miss that video. And never forget, life is short, so do not waste yours. Cheers, guys.